Welcome back, everybody. Gmar Chatima Tova. Yom Kippur invites us to stand at the threshold of the I and the we. It is at once asking us to reflect personally, to look at how we treat ourselves and others, and to reflect collectively. Ashamnu, we say, we are guilty. Bagadnu, we say, we have betrayed. Gazalnu, we have stolen. In these moments of reflection, in these moments of collective confession, our tradition is inviting us to notice the porousness in the boundary between the I and the we, to notice, as I noted last night, the ways that our fates are intertwined. The Haftorah we read this morning on Yom Kippur is part of our sacred conversation at this boundary. In this, Prophet Isaiah makes clear that what God truly desires is not that we starve our bodies on Yom Kippur, is not that we bow our heads and lay weary in sackcloth, for us to treat each other with the dignity and compassion that we all deserve. In the words of Isaiah, God desires that we unlock the fetters of wickedness, untie the cords of the yoke to let the oppressed go free. And God desires that we take the poor into our homes and clothe the naked. I wonder how to think about this prophetic call for justice and compassion in this era of COVID-19, in this moment when so many of us have been stretching ourselves to care for others and to take care of ourselves. I know that so many of you, in your personal lives and here at the temple and beyond, are serving others. You are healthcare workers, caring for the bodies and spirits of the sick during this pandemic. You are teachers, desperately trying to support the learning and self-actualization of the kids in your care. This intimate work somehow has to happen through a computer screen, or if in person, through masks and strict safety rules. You serve this community, helping all of us weather this pandemic together. You make sure our kids still get a Jewish education and have b'nai mitzvahs. You make sure everything we do together is safe. You make sure we are financially stable and have services and programming that keep us connected. You take care of your kids, you take care of your parents, and even in these less stable financial times, you give tzedakah. Every one of you tuning in today is in one way or another serving others in these trying times. So in light of this, how might we understand Isaiah's call? I want to invite us this morning to see Isaiah's words as asking us to do something deeper than changing our actions. I want to invite us to see his words as asking us to change our hearts. Because fundamentally, what Isaiah is calling upon us to do is expand our circles of concern. He is calling upon us to widen our sense of us in these difficult times. We see this most clearly when Isaiah says, Umi besarecha lo titalam. Do not ignore those of your own flesh. He is not simply saying here that we should not turn away from the suffering of others. Isaiah is saying that we need to do better at seeing people under the yoke of oppression and in need of bread or shelter or clothing as of the same flesh as we are. Our circles of concern must include them as well. In other words, what Isaiah is asking of us is to expand our sense of collective responsibility. In the realm of Musar, of applied Jewish ethics, there is much ink spilled on this question of responsibility, or in Hebrew, achrayut. The word achrayut itself is where the spiritual excavation begins. According to Alan Marinis, one of the leaders of the contemporary Musar movement, the word achrayut is born out of the word acher, or other, and is fundamentally about holding other people's burdens with them and seeking the benefit of others in all possible ways. It is not simply about doing good deeds, but about expanding the horizons of our soul so that we begin to see the burdens of others as our own burdens and the thriving of others as our own thriving. According to the 19th century Musar teacher, the Altar of Kelm, we are to be like Moses in this regard. Moses was a shepherd in his early days because he wanted to accustom himself to holding the burdens of his fellow beings with them. The rabbis of the Talmud tell a story about what it looked like for Moses to do just this. One of his lambs fled unexpectedly, and he ran after it and found it at a watering hole. In that moment, Moses did not chastise the lamb, but instead he said, "I did not know that you fled because you were thirsty. You must be tired." After the sheep finished drinking, Moses lifted him on his shoulders and carried him home. Achrayut, then, is about developing the soul qualities that gets us to put the sheep on our shoulders when they are tired. In this era of COVID-19, Isaiah invites us to reflect on how we are doing at carrying each other's burdens together. And even more specifically, Isaiah invites us to consider whose burdens are we and are we not doing a good job of carrying. All of us have been hit hard by this pandemic, and we have also seen the ways that COVID-19 has affected different groups in our society disproportionately. We have seen the ways that those who are already most marginalized in society, poor people, the elderly, people of color, people with disabilities, to name just a few groups, are the ones who have been hit hardest by this virus, who because of their membership in these groups tend to be more isolated, have less access to healthcare, have less secure and often overcrowded housing, are the essential workers who too often do not receive adequate personal protective equipment or sick leave, and particularly affecting young people in these groups, are struggling more with online learning and have less access to internet, devices, and parental help. What might it look like for us here at TBT and beyond to widen our circles of concern to include all of us? Father Greg Boyle, a Jesuit priest and the founder of the LA-based gang intervention program, Homeboy Industries, understands this critical work of expanding our sense of us as creating kinship. Kinship, he teaches, is what happens to remember that it is about locating ourselves in a circle of compassion in which no one is standing on the outside, a circle that gets wider and wider and is always edging closer to the margins. And when we reach these margins, when we stand at these margins, Boyle teaches that when we stand at the margins with those whose dignity has been denied, with those considered too poor and powerless and voiceless to ever before be considered part of the circle, we make those margins disappear. When we stand with the demonized, the demonizing will stop. When we stand with those considered disposable, one day we will stop throwing people away. The work of kinship is to widen the circle until it becomes truly all-encompassing. This, Boyle teaches, is how we move from a place of promoting justice and compassion to finally celebrating it. The prophet Isaiah agrees. If we are better able to hold the burdens of our lives with each other, this can radically shift what our world looks like. In Isaiah's words, it will become a world of light and healing. It will become a place in which God protects us, answers our prayers, and guides us. Our world will be like a rebuilt ruin. its foundation restored. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, one of our tradition's greatest philosophers and spiritual teachers, offers us the following words for this moment of collective reflection. The more deeply immersed I became in the thinking of the prophets, the more powerfully it became clear to me what the lives of the prophets sought to convey, that morally speaking, there is no limit to the concern one must feel for the suffering of human beings, that indifference to evil is worse than evil itself, that in a free society, some are guilty, but all are responsible. In this broken world that we live in this world made even more broken by COVID-19, I urge each of us to ask ourselves what it might look like to expand our circles of concern. I urge each of us to ask, what might it look like to see those we view as other, as of the same flesh as we are? If there was ever a time to widen our sense of us, to bridge the I and the we, this truly is the time. We continue with our Musaf service, and we begin with Hineni, which we find on page 608.